Pelangga berubah menjadi IKIP Malang. Dengan demikian, kita sebagai prodi pendidikan sejarah sudah cukup pembelajaran mahasiswa, sehingga mahasiswa dengan nyaman dan aman dapat belajar. Jurusan sejarah juga memiliki jurnal yang terakreditasi, Sinta 3 dan Sinta 4. Jurusan sejarah bekerjasama dengan KITLB dari Belanda. Dari dalam negeri, beberapa instansi telah menjalin kerjasama dengan pihak jurusan sejarah, antara lain Balai Arkeologi Kalimantan Selatan, BPCB Wilayah Jawa Timur, MGMP Jawa Timur, Dinas Kebudayaan dan Pariwisata Jawa Timur, Dinas Pendidikan baik di Jawa Timur maupun di kabupaten-kabupaten, dan berbagai universitas di tanah air.
Nama saya Rakegino.
Saya Aukiran Alia.
Saya
Bibit Anggraini.
Zain Masa.
Saya lulusan dari Pendidikan Sejarah.
S1 Ilmu Sejarah.
Saya senang bisa berkuliah di jurusan Sejarah Universitas Negeri Malang.
Salah satu hal yang perlu saya syukuri di hidup saya,
Karena lingkungan pembelajarannya yang menyenangkan, proses pembelajarannya yang kreatif, inovatif, dan komunikatif.
Banyak mata kuliah yang berbobot dan
Memberikan pengalaman dan materi yang luar biasa sebagai persiapan untuk mengajar di sekolah.
saat ini sangat bermanfaat bagi karir saya.
karena di sini saya menemukan lingkungan belajar yang mendukung saya untuk tetap produktif, inovatif, dan juga berprestasi.
Saya bekerja
Di SMA Negeri 1 Malang,
Jurnalis di Jatim Times Network.
Dinas Kebudayaan dan Pendidikan sebagai tim ahli cagar budaya Kota Malang.
Menjadi mahasiswa jurusan sejarah Universitas Negeri Malang memberikan saya peluang lebih belajar berbagai hal dari para ekspertis.
Swastisa Bahagia.
Sofia Pitai.
Langkah besar dimulai saat ini. Mereka akan berhenti ketika langkahmu tidak dimulai. Wujudkan cita-cita mereka dengan semangat dan tekad besar dari pendahulu bangsa. Berpijak dan melangkahlah dari sejarah. Ciptakan lompatan besar untuk negeri. Menengok dari sejarah, tapi tidak untuk kembali.
Good evening, everyone, and good morning for Professor Vitor Teixeira in Porto, beautiful city in Porto. So today we will continue our guest lecture. If last week we discussed Portuguese expansion to Indonesian archipelago, so today we will discuss some Indonesian resistance to Portuguese hegemony. So let me try to introduce Professor Teixeira. He is an associate professor at Universidad Fernando Pessoa. He was born in Porto in 1969. He lives in Vila Nova Gaya, having already lived and worked in Macau. He graduated in history, completed a master in medieval history, and completed his PhD, all programs at the Faculty of Arts of the University of Porto, our alma mater. In addition to his academic career, teaching, research, university extension, his personal goals include consultancy, dissemination, and communication of science, participation in scientific social projects, and the design of travel and cultural programs. His areas of expertise and activity since 1993 are history, Portugal, universal Portuguese expansion in the world, intercultural and religious relations, Portugal-Indonesia, historical relation, Islam and Christianity, religious phenomena, Oriental religions, history of arts and heritage, Portuguese expansion, Luso-Oriental art, iconography, artistic tradition, rare and ancient book, history, evaluation, and taxation, culture, and geopolitics, geostrategy, focusing on Asia, with emphasis on the Far East, Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Indo-Pacific. And the history and culture of wine, as well as the history of human economy. He has published scientific and knowledge dissemination journals, books, and book chapters in these areas. As hobbies beside traveling, he loves reading old books, swimming, diving, and having contact with nature. He has a website in preparation, Vitor Teixeira Guru, but in the meantime, his profiles can be consulted in Facebook, Vitor Teixeira 1622, LinkedIn, and Orchid link. Today, as I said before, we will discuss Portuguese, Indonesian resistance to Portuguese hegemony. So, in briefly, the Portuguese conquest of Malacca in 1511 had changed Indonesian geopolitics and geoeconomics. All Indonesian traders could not freely pass the Strait of Malacca. They should have the permission to pass or cartas. The Portuguese forced them to anchor and sell their product in Malacca. Some Malays had tried to find alternative sailing route beyond the west coast of Sumatra, but they encountered a lot of risk. The Portuguese continually dominated and established exclusive policy. Many Malays, Acehnese, and Johoris could not access the same economic sources. Fortunately, the Portuguese monopoly in the state of Malacca was not perfectly implemented. Some locals limited the Portuguese sphere of influence. Demak, Johor, Aceh, and Jepara had tried to invade Malacca during the 16th century. The next century, the locals, even they collaborated with the Dutch, they still resisted the Portuguese hegemony. The Dutch and Malay succeeded to force the Portuguese to surrender in 1641. This guest lecture today will consider why did the locals invade the Portuguese Malacca. Secondly, how did the Portuguese handle the political upheavals in the Straits? And finally, why did the Portuguese Malacca surrender in 1641? Without further ado, time and Zoom space is yours, Professor Vitor Teixeira.
Thank you. Selamat siang. Good afternoon in Malang. Here it's good morning, but it's normal. We are beginning our day. I hope you are good. Thank you for this beautiful invitation, Professor Daya. It's very honor for me to be present, to be here, to share with you my research and our works concerning the relations between Portugal and Indonesia. So, in the last session, 7 days ago, we talked about the sources concerning the history of the Portuguese here in the Southeast Asia. Today we will talk about the pivotal importance of Malacca, the Straits, and historical approaches, connections, ties, and lies, and the fights, the oppositions among these powers. But we have to analyze a question, the religious question, prior to examine, prior to uh, talk about the sieges and the oppositions, why they did this kind of oppositions, Aceh, Jepara, and the whole of the kingdoms that they were united against the Portuguese presence in the Straits. So we have to, I will read some parts. It's clearest for you. I will speak slowly, and I hope you have some questions in the to we discuss. But we have um, to remember the decline of the Hinduism of the king of Mojapahit in East Java, uh, and well, a decline that it's connected with the maritime trade developed by the first Islamic traders. The spread of the Islam was very important to define the outline, to define these networks in Southeast Asia. Why the Islam is very, it's so important, not because it still to be a great religion until nowadays, not because of course only this, but in the beginnings, we have talked some months ago about expression. There were a race between Islam and Christianism in Southeast Asia. For many authors, for many academics, they consider that it was almost a race, but it was not really a race. It was a shoes in many aspects of the populations. For example, with his rationalism, the concept of equality among the man, among the humankind, behind God, in order to God, the notion of the individual moral responsibility, the idea that God, it's a transcendency, and it's exterior to the world. It's very important. It's not the world, it was not sacred, but it was created by God to the man. Um, with these concepts, Islam came to subvert, to opposite the traditional order of the Hinduism, with the castes regime, with a social division based on the religion, what was refused by the Islam. We have to, and for example, the Hinduists, they had the idea that the sovereign, the king was divine. For Islamic, for the Islam, the kings, they are not divines. Divine, it's God and the idea of God, which God create the world to the man. God didn't sacralize the world. He only create a world for the man. Well, this is very important because these ideas, they conquer the spirits and the souls of the people. The people, they come, well, after some centuries of Hinduism, they turn to be a kind of upset, and with the castes, with this system of division of the society, which was not very welcome. And Islam appeared with from the social economy classes, uprising economically, traders, entrepreneur people. These people was very important because they warranty a kind of harbor bourgeoisie, a harbor social sector of the society with the capacity to develop the country more than the Hinduists they did before. And it's very interesting. I'm reading that Islam did they made a cultural revolution in the society in Southeast Asia. And when the Christianism appeared, they appeared late. Late because the Islam took a place in the heart of the societies of the peoples. Islam appeared with equality, with a more fair society, differently than the structured and divided, also divided, sorry, Christian society. And what they came to, what kind of people came with Islam to Southeast Asia? Traders from Hadramaut, from not only from there in Yemen, but mainly from Gujarat in India, even from Yunnan in south of China. From many sultanates of India, they were very important to adaptate and to create a society which was replaced the Hinduist systems soon, and they created a kind of powers, very important powers, the sultanates of the north part of the island of Java and Sumatra, of course. The first Muslims, well, we have the archaeology, we have lots of testimonies of this presence everywhere in the Geresik, for example, in many areas. Ibn Battuta, a traveler, identified some communities, Muslim communities, Shafite, in Sumatra, for example. The Muslims, they came to Indonesia, to Sumatra, the northern harbors of the coast of Java, in the 14, perhaps before, as the travelers, they identified. And they came to, with the Walid, this kind of saints. They were very important in the 15th century to Islamize the 9 walis that they were crucial to the replace of the old Hinduist ascets, the gurus, and they establish a wall of traders, powers of Muslims. The Muslims, they became not only rice producers, they became not only farmers, but mainly they were the people with an access to the money. Money, later the silver from Manila, the silver from the Portuguese, but these traders, they were very important to have enough money to support the political activity of the new sultanates in Java, and mainly of these, the connections. Those connections, they were they included the harbors in Malay Peninsula. They included the harbors in Bengal, India, in Gujarat, in elsewhere in the Indian Ocean, where the Muslim traditions were established. So Islam means connections, means international network. Malacca was one of the most important spots of this international network. And this international network of Malacca was connected not only with Aceh, in northeast of Sumatra, but also with the new kingdoms that which replaced the Hinduist kingdoms of Java. So just to resume, those traders communities, Muslim traders communities of the Pasisir, they put away the Majapahit kingdom, and the first harbor being emancipated, the first Muslim power emancipated from the Hinduist rule was Demak. The Portuguese, they call Demak. Demak, a very rich and powerful rice producer. It was very important in the connections with Malacca, not only the religion, but also the rice, also the fresh products, also the feeding of the connections between Java and Malacca. Malacca depended many times from this rice from the kingdoms of the northern and central Java. And the Mac was a very good, a great exporter of rice, ruled by Muslims with a Chinese origin, the first rulers of the Mac. And they were these Chinese connections, like the future husband of the Queen of Japara, Chinese, Islamized Chinese, which who becomes a very important sovereign. It will be very important and relevant among the connections in South China Sea, the connections with Southeast Asia among the territories from China to Malay Peninsula and to the archipelago. In the beginning of the 16th century, the Pasisir from Sunda to Surabaya was completely Islamized. In 1527, I will talk later about Malacca, but it's very important to analyze the Islamization and the creation of powers, of the political structures in the Java, mainly also in Sumatra and other islands. In 1527, we have some strong powers in Kudus, Demak, for example. They defeated the Kraton of Majapahit. They attacked and they destroyed the last Hinduist powers, and they destroyed definitely the kingdom of Majapahit. A Portuguese source, Fernão Mendes Pinto, he talked about this hegemony of the Muslim powers from the northern shore to the central, to the inside of Java, and the creation in Java Central, Central Java, of the Pajang, a kingdom of a Muslim sultanate of Pajang. The reunification of Java only be held in 1588, later than this, with the Senapati, the founder of the kingdom of Mataram. Well, and with the capital in Kota Gede, nearby Yogyakarta. Only in the end of the 16th century, Java will be unified under a Muslim faith. It's very interesting because some years later they will come the Dutch, a new power. But even with the Dutch colonization, the Islam will be spread and rooted in the population, not only in Java, but the majority of the archipelago. So we have, I will try to resume. concerning the sources of the Portuguese. The Portuguese, they look at Java after this explanation about the creation of these Islamic ties in the island of Java, before the arrival of the Portuguese, we have to underline this. The Portuguese in Java and the central area of the archipelago, the Portuguese, they only heard to talk about Java perhaps when they conquered Malacca in 1511. So in Malacca, there were two colonies, two districts where the population became from Java. One of them came from Garesic, the suburb of Hilaire. It's very important in the definition of the networks in the between Malacca and Java, for example. Hilaire in the southeast of Malacca, with population from Garesic. They were ruled by a guy when the Portuguese arrived called Tuan Colascar. And these people of Hilaire, they they were small traders. The other one was formed from people from central Pasisir, from Sunda and from Lampung in the south of Sumatra. The south of Sumatra was very Javanized, was more Javanized than Sumatran, and they were more connected with Java. Java, as you know better than me, of course, but Java, it's a very important power and cultural pivotal center in Southeast Asia, with a different and unique and very proper culture. The history, we have to remind these aspects of religion and culture when we want to define our timelines, when we want to explain many of these aspects. And these people from this other suburb of Upah, UPAH, in Malacca, from these people from Pasisir, they were more prosper, more wealthiest. They assured the connections between Malacca and the rice from the northern Java, from Demak, from Jepara, from the rice paddies producers of the feeding to the people. Malacca was completely dependent of the rice production from Java and the freshes from Sumatra, for example, mainly from Demak. After the conquest of Malacca by the Portuguese, 1511, the Portuguese, they deep the knowledge about the archipelago, about Java, as we can check in Suma Oriental of Tomé Pires, one of the first treatises. I talk about some of these bibliography, some of these secondary and printed sources on the last session to support today our analysis. And Tomé Pires, and for example, the Francisco Rodrigues, the book with the sketches and drawings, with a very important cartography, he connected, like they supported the future Atlas Miller with the first drawings of the Southeast Asia, mainly of the islands of the archipelago. Mojapahit, for instance, after the conquest of Malacca, they sent ambassadors to the captain Afonso de Albuquerque, and Albuquerque given to Mojapahit an elephant. Well, it was not a very good change, but it was a sign of difference, of respect. The Javanese of Hilaire, the people coming from a area until now in the conquest of Malacca, subordinated to Majapahit, the two districts, Hilaire, Upé. Hilaire was more connected with the Hinduist kingdoms of Majapahit in Malacca. The Upé, they are more connected with the Islamic powers of Central Java. This defines and clear the future alliances to try that they used to reconquer Malacca to the reconnect with the Islamic powers in Southeast Asia. So the colony of Upé, they try to create a tie and a connection with the former Sultan until the conquest of the Portuguese. And well, they tried to create new connections, and they design a wall of ideas and politics and treaties to put away the Portuguese from Malacca. Well, we have lots of aspects and historical approaches on this. The king of Sunda, for example, and some Pati in Sanskrit, Lord, they with the connection of with the Sultan of Surabaya, they like, and also Garasik, Tuban, Sedayu, for example, they tried to make the first coalition to expel the Portuguese. And we have the appearance of power, of a new power in Java, trying to command, trying to create a coalition among these Islamic sultanates to expel the Portuguese from Malacca. It was from Japara, the most hostile sultanate in the northern Java, commanded and ruled by the Princess Ratu Kalinyamat. Well, Ratu Kalinyamat, and it's the resume of what I'm talking about in this presentation. You have here in the PowerPoint. I'm sorry to do not scroll down, but we should talk about the importance of these kingdoms, the Islamization, the Wali, and about Japara, that the Portuguese sources we consider as a very rich and powerful area, very prosperous, and ruled by a queen we respected so very much. We have here, dear students and professors, the divisions, the communities which I talk in Malacca, the Javanese communities, the suppliers of rice, of products, mainly the people from Upé, more Islamized and more connected with the central kingdoms in Japara. So, and the sources I talked about after the conquest from Suma Oriental, and cartography, Francisco Rodrigues and Pedro Reinel, for example. And About the geopolitical and geostrategical analysis. The arrival of the Portuguese did not only affect the area around Malacca, but also had an impact on other areas, including Jepara. Jepara was a very important position and strategical hub, a spot in the middle of the coastal line of northern Java, in the middle way between the Malay Peninsula, Johor, Malacca, Sumatra, and the Moluccan Islands. Moluccas, they were the aim of the Portuguese to catch and to trade the glove, which was very important and very well honored in the West. Ratu Kalinyamat and Jepara, they became a very important ally with Aceh, the Sultanate, one of strongest sultanates in the area, in the Straits, one of the most important oppositors to the Portuguese in Malacca, with the alliance of and the unity with the Kingdom of Jepara. And we, dear students and professors, we have to analyze here this. Aceh, the Islamization of Java, Sumatra, as I talked before, it was made with the coming of people, of Muslims from Gujarat and Bengali, west and east of modern India, even from south of China, from Yunnan, and few, not so much, but some people from Hadramaut in Yemen, with a mercantile trade mentality. And the trade mentality supports an idea of international connections. Japan was a rice producer, but was mainly a rice exporter, not only rice, and was an intermediary between the west of the archipelago and the source of the gloves in the east of Indonesia, Moluccas, Buin, and also with Borneo and Sulawesi. This pivotal central place of Jepara was important to build the strength of the kingdom, and with the alliance with Aceh, they were able to create a force to fight the Portuguese intermission, but forced a force with the support of what? Of the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish in the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish from Istanbul, the Turkish with the connections with Cairo in Egypt, the Turkish, they were the rulers of the West Indian Ocean. The Portuguese, they appear in the Indian Ocean, and they threaten this international Ottoman network. We have to have the conscience, and we have to analyze these similar and epochal powers. So we don't have only to check up the strategy upon Malacca, but also to insert Malacca and the Indonesian connections in order to international alliance which begins or starts in Constantinople, in Istanbul, in the modern Turkey, until the eastern part of the archipelago. And with the Indian sultanates in the, like, for example, Gujarat, the Indian kingdoms, Muslim kingdoms, where the Portuguese were established, but where they suffered some defeats, mainly when these Islamic powers, they were really connected, and they imposed the Terracotta victory in 1565 with the participation of many sultanates from Java, Sumatra, and from the archipelago, namely the Queen of Japara, and they defeated the Hinduist kingdoms and alliance in India with the support of the Portuguese artillery. So, we have this approach to we can have a clearest idea about the this we don't we it's not only to focus in Java or in Sumatra or even in Malacca. We have to create a more international idea. We have to remember that the Yemenites from Hadramaut established in the highlands of the archipelago, they were not only simple traders, they were ambassadors of international policy. They still have their connections until nowadays. As you know better than me, the descendants of these people from Hadramaut, they were very important in the creation of hubs, commercial and economical hubs in the archipelago. And well, in each hub, they created also a connection with the Indian Ocean. And if you don't mind, we can analyze a little bit this to support what I'm trying to explain for you. This international coalition between the Turkish, the Ottomans, the Muslim powers in the Indian Ocean, namely from Indonesia, and tries to expel and to put out from Malacca the Portuguese. Well, the Portuguese, they preferred, perhaps, they committed the mistake to build political and trade relations mainly with the Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms. Well, they refused to accept the Islam, and it was the mistake. They have a competition against the Islamic powers, and this, of course, this was not a very good strategy. Portuguese, we haven't any number of soldiers. The numbers of Portuguese, they were not very good. They cannot support our wishes to conquer, because the Portuguese, they were few people until nowadays, and they need to create alliances with the regional powers. They elected an enemy, the Islamic sultanates. They conquered Malacca, and they have to create some alliances. They created alliances with the Hindus, with the Buddhists, when they never checked that. They never realized that they arrived in Southeast Asia when the Hindu Buddhist kingdoms begin to fall. And they never considered and they never give the real importance to the uprising of the spreading of Islam. And the Islam became victorious, became the winning the wall of the connections and ties among these areas. So this this fight against Islam was not strategic, and mainly when the Portuguese created cooperations with the enemies, with the refusers in situ of the Islam, the Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms like Majapahit, for example, and many others in India or in Southeast Asia. So in some areas it worked out, but in Southeast Asian and archipelago was not very profitable. It was why appeared these alliances. The Islamic powers, they were more clever, yes, they were smartest than the Portuguese, yes. In a modern judgment, we can consider that they used to create a wall of alliances, international alliances, at the same time that they are spreading and giving and creating number. The majority of the islands and regions in the central archipelago, Sumatra, they come to be converted to the Islam. The people, they preferred the conversion to the Islam. It was the first defeat of the Portuguese. The preference and it was very natural for the populations in Southeast Asia become Muslim, then became Christian. Yes, it's true, and this religious support failed, and the Portuguese have to concentrate their options in the military and the political aspects. The military, the Portuguese, they were reduced to the garrisons of militaries of the soldiers, not so many people in Portugal to support the army, and the Portuguese have to design a political strategy. Politically talking, the Portuguese, they used to ally with the Hinduist and Buddhist kingdoms. They were falling. So everything was against the Portuguese. Even the Portuguese, they profit with the trade of the gloves. Even if the Portuguese created more connections with Southeast Asia, even the Portuguese used to create many communities in Indonesia, in Sulawesi, in Aceh, in Tugu, Banten, Sunda, in Flores, Larantuca, Timor. Even the Portuguese were very smart to tie with lots of areas, but in generally they could defeat, yes, the Queen of Jepara. They could resist in Malacca, but they couldn't resist to the time when the Portuguese came to be united to the Spaniards in 1580 until 1640. The Portuguese, they were defeated in 1641 in Malacca because they were completely weakened by the fall of the Portuguese Empire. Malacca became surrounded and sieged and attacked for many times the Portuguese resisted, but without any supplies from Goa, without any support from Lisbon, it was very difficult. Lisbon was under Madrid, Spain. The Portuguese, until, as I said, 1640, we were in a dual monarchy with Spain, and the Spaniards, they look up to protect and to support our empire than the Portuguese empire. And we suffered for many aspects, for many reasons. We lost many of our glove productions. We lost Tidor, we lost Ternat. The Dutchmen, they came and they defeated the Portuguese subsequently in the eastern part of the archipelago, and the presence of the Portuguese, they became reduced to some areas. We have many people descending of the Portuguese, as I said, the Bardaicas, for example. We have a very important Portuguese writer, Antonio Godinho de Heredia. Himself, he was descendant of Portuguese and mestizo, and the Portuguese from Sulawesi, from Makassar, Topasso. But the Portuguese, they have to fight. Oh, I'm sorry. Everything is okay.
Yes, everything is okay.
I'm sorry. Okay, I have more 5-10 minutes, no?
Yes, 5 to
Okay.
10 minutes.
Thank you. I can later write the main topics using the PowerPoints. I will talk with Professor Vijaya to create a tool, instrument to organize these topics in order to define a current timeline and a speech with more clearance. Okay, it's very important in this one of the topics suggested by Professor Daya, the importance of the realms, the kingdoms in Java, where the figure of Ratu Kaliyamat was very important. She was really a great national hero because she, the widow of a Chinese Islamized, converted to the Islam, became a king, and she became the queen of, assumed the power in the kingdom, the Sultanate of Jepara. This is very relevant in the, if you analyze in the gender history, from the Muslim, from the Islam, the women, if you watch the history of the Queen of Jepara, you can see that the role of the women, it was the same, or well, you have not to think it's the same or it's different. It's a role without any comparison. And she assumed the power at the eyes of the Portuguese with the wall of the justice and fairy. She was a queen with all the legal and natural support, without any constriction, without any social and political disability. It's very interesting because it was not so easy. For example, in Europe, at the same time, woman became a queen so respected. We had queens, of course, but with the respected and with the position and with the natural power assumed by the Queen of Japara, it was not so usual. The women, they were not so well considered in the Christianism than in the Islam. Yes, in the 16th, 17th century, the women, as we can see in the case of the Queen of Japara, they were very well estimated and welcome, and they were naturally a power, a rule than a man, for example. So she was able to ask for these alliances, to draw and to design a wall of ties with the international powers. This is a very important aspect. The historians and many historians in Portugal, and well, and elsewhere, they came to be a little bit surprised with these abilities and these capacities of the easternmost, so far away from the middle of nowhere, these kingdoms of the Far East archipelago, they were in the front line to create these international strategies and became a part of the interest and became a part of the fights and the wars against the Western powers incoming in Asia. And the greatness of and power of the Queen of Japara was really very important in the among these alliances. She was with the King of Aceh. She was able to attack and to siege many times the Portuguese in Malacca. The Portuguese existence in Malacca, we were defeated in 1641 in Malacca. We were more focused in the restoration in Portugal. As Mr. Vijaya knows, he can explain later in his classes in Bahasa Indonesia. The Portuguese, they were united until the Spanish rule with the Spaniards until 1640. And the Portuguese, the Madrid almost abandoned the Portuguese Empire. What means this? Means that the power of some factories, some places like Malacca, for example, Macau, and many feitorias, Portuguese trade hubs and fortresses with churches, they were abandoned by the Portuguese. They were abandoned by the central power of the Spanish-Portuguese Empire. And the Portuguese were weak to support empire from Brazil until the Moluccas, for instance. They have to make their options. They have to abandon many areas. And even with the importance of Malacca, the Portuguese were not so strong to defend and to resist, to support the siege of the Dutch. And the Dutch, they came to, since 1605, they began to attack the Portuguese interests in Asia, because they know that the Portuguese, they were weak. And after the restoration of the independence, the Portuguese, they had to concentrate their strength in the war against the Spaniards to reestablish the independence of Portugal and to defend at the same time the independence win in 1640. Malacca did resist. Malacca fell to the Dutch, like many areas, like many interests of the Portuguese in Indonesia. We only resisted, we only remained still to be present in Timor, in East Timor, and Atauro Island, Oekusi, Beno. Well, and for some years in Flores, for example, Larantuca, and some areas in this region. And even in the future, we have to abandon and only to be in East Timor. So the Portuguese, we had since 1511 until 1641 connection with Indonesia, political, military, economical. We have based from Malacca, with the connection of Malacca, we had to we were able to design a strategy, but we have to abandon, and we still to abandon, and political and military and even commercially, with the uprising of the Eastern India's company, the VOC of the Dutch Empire. So the Portuguese, they still to be present in order to remind the Crocong and the Portuguese cultural traditions in some areas, in some spots in the Indonesia. Well, I think I finished my time. I tried to resume Mr. Dyer.
Yes.
Yes. I have lots to stuff to talk, but I'm finishing now.
Yes, yes. Thank you, thank you. Can we move to another
Thank
session?
you.
Thank you so much for your speech.
Thank you.
Before we are going to the Q&A session, let me invite Pak Reza. Pak Reza, are you with us?
Yes.
Yeah, probably Pak Reza has some arguments or some question before we are going to our student. Probably they have some question, because I saw in the chat box we have 2 questions. Pak Reza, you have some arguments or question to Pak Vitor?
Okay. Thank you, Professor, for willingly give lecture about the Portuguese and the Japanese resistance in Java. I think this such of material is very important, since we are lack of information about the Java from the Portuguese perspective. Most of us know Portuguese from Portuguese or Japanese states in 15th to 16th century is from Japanese or Malay chronicle, which mostly full of some kind of legend and myths. Even me and the people in Indonesia knows about Portuguese from, I think, from the movie of title Fatahillah, released in 1997, which later has been dated as the anniversary of Jakarta. And maybe our history book also, but our history book also recognized that the coming of the Portuguese as the turning point in our history. But if we note from 1511, it can be said that the resistance of Portuguese is relatively stronger than the opposition to Dutch. And probably I can have some question that what makes the resistance of the Japanese state, also Malay state to Portuguese is, I think, is stronger than the same opposition from the Java or Malay to the Dutch and English. Maybe I have some incorrectness. Thank you, Professor.
Peter, do you get the point?
Yes, I have. Sorry.
Pariza just asked some question related to why some Malays resisted stronger than before or after in the age of the Dutch. So why it's stronger than after when the Dutch colonized Indonesian archipelago?
Why they were so strong against the Dutch?
Yeah, against the Portuguese.
Well, the resistance against the Portuguese, it was based in the spot of Malacca. The resistance against the Portuguese was not in Sumatra, was not in Java. Well, we had resistance in Moluccas, yes, in Tidore, Ambon, Ternate. We registered many disasters, military disasters there, because if you check the history of Islam, and it's very important, we have to open our minds here in Europe, and we have to analyze this. When we are arriving to Maluku, to Moluccas, we are arriving at the same time of the spread of the Islam. And the Portuguese, they had a historical rage, hate against the Muslims, because we were ruled by the Muslims here in the peninsula, well, blah, 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 blah. Well, it was the history of this time. And the Portuguese, they have a focus to defeat the Islam, the universal Islam. And we were not able to do this until Moluccas. And in Moluccas, we wore the gloves. It was a fashion. It was a fever, like gold, like silver. And the Portuguese, they fight against the kingdoms of the sultans. And even Japara was, and other Muslim kingdoms, they were inserted in these fights. They supported the Muslim sultanates of Moluccas to fight the Portuguese. We were not strong to defeat them. The resistance of the Indonesians and the Malays, well, in the archipelago, in the 16th and 17th century, 15, 16, it was not very strong. In Malay Peninsula, in Malacca, the resistance was through the alliances between the strength coming from the islands. You have to imagine that the powers, they conciliated against the Portuguese. The most part of the strength came from the naval power of the sultanates of Aceh, Jepara, mainly these two sultanates. The most part of the vessels, the ships, the boats, and the men, even the artillery, even the junks, everything, the strength, military power came from the islands of the archipelago. But the resistance was in the Malay Peninsula against the Portuguese. Well, against the Dutch in Indonesia, in the colonial Indonesia, the Dutch, they had the strongest military presence in Indonesia than us. They were a colonial power. They settled, they create a capital and headquarter, and they create a administration, a public and regional administration everywhere from Aceh to Irian Jaya. They create a structure, a Calvinist structure, without, well, they try to convert, but it was not the main scope of the Dutch. It was not to it was not to fight against the Islam. It was not a religious scope. It was economical and political colonial scope. The Dutch, they were sufficiently organized to create a colony. The Portuguese, we were not able because we had not enough people to colonize. We only tried to create ties and connections, commercial, and some hubs were some families, mestizos, and some friars, like in Palembangkan, for example, when the weakness of the Islam it was not, it was real, and when the resistance of the Hinduist Buddhists in Eastern Java, for example, or some areas of Sunda, the Portuguese, they tried to convert, but without any success, because in 1597, for example, in Palembangkan, they had to abandon the missions like they will abandon in Moluccas. So the resistance, it was different. Perhaps the Indonesians superior in number. I don't know if you made any international alliance you could expel the Dutch before 1947, for example, 1945. We have a very interesting, I don't know if I answer to you, Professor Reza. I will, in order of your question, I will make a transition to the Irfan, a very interesting issue. It's the informal and the formal. What means this? The Dutch, they were more formal. The VOC was a majestic company with military power, with financial power, with administrative, strategic, with autonomy, with the capacity to rule a colony, to rule law. The formal power. The formal power becomes from the law. It was supported by the institution, which gives support to administration, centralized, organized, and developed under the schemes of the law. The informal. The Portuguese were more informal many times. What was this informality? The informality, it was, for example, the smuggling. It was, for example, the whole of the activities in a parallel way to the formality. Because imagine, we had the power in Goa to rule Malacca, to rule Moluccas, to rule the eastern part of the archipelago. They were subordinated to the central power in Goa. Around Goa, in the Indian colonies, the formal Portuguese power, it was really okay without, well, without, it's not the real expression, the correct expression, sorry, but the formality, religion, politics, administration, it was ruled under the law. But in the periphery, in areas so far from the center of Goa, the informality becomes the rule, in commas. And it's why the politics, the Portuguese politics of the inter-ethnic marriage, for example, it was why the Portuguese, they created some structures. They were not outlaw, but well, a little bit informal. And this kind of, Mr. Daya studied here in Portugal, he knows this informality of the Portuguese. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. But the law, okay, forget the law. We can do like this and this and this. It was, we created some structures, we create some traditions, we create another empire, an informal empire. The Dutch, they keep there until the 40s in 20th century because they were formal. They were Calvinists, they are Calvinists. The moral depends of the organization. It was why, for example, the Muslim, the Islam, it's more rationalist, it's more formal than the informality of the Portuguese Catholicism, for example. It's why, in my opinion, we have to study the basis, the Islamic basis, the religious basis. It's very important before we depart to the history, we analyze the structure of the religion, how the religion produces culture, how the religions produces ethics, morality, how the religions rules the relations among society, why the people prefer to be converted to the Islam than the Christianism. It was not a preference, but Islam offered equality. Every you, without any distinction, even the kings, they pray in the same mosque with the poor, for example. For me, it's the example. The king comes to the mosque to pray with the humbles, with the poorest in the mosque, for example. In the Christianism, it was not anything like this. Okay, Mr. Ronaldinho Mascarenhas, with a very strong Portuguese name. It's not with me, okay. It's to
He
Mr.
is
Daya.
he is Timorense. So his father's from
Ah,
Timor and his
from
mother
Timor, okay.
from Java. So his name is Ronaldinho Harry Mascarenhas, like Dom Pedro Mascarenhas.
Okay, it's
Uh,
Panaruka. Panaruka, it's
Aranuka.
Eastern Java. Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's not so
Uh,
far from Malang, no.
yeah. He Akib is a master student. He is pursuing master degree here in Malang. He asked about Panarukan in East Java. Was Panarukan pivotal for the Portuguese during the age of commerce?
The Black Portuguese. The Portuguese, they had missions, they tried to evangelize and to convert Panarucan. We have in our literature, it's Panaruca, how we call this. It's very interesting. It's not very well studied, but so we have to begin to study these small and local, I'm sorry, but these specified areas in Java where the Portuguese created some connections. For example, the Portuguese, they tried to evangelize, to convert this area because they felt that here they could convert, because many people seems to be in the middle to the conversion to the Islam, and well, without a kind of indecision to follow up if they will be Muslims or not. And the friars, the Franciscans, for instance, they try to create missions, but without any success, because they came to be converted to the Islam. My name is Nanda. I want
Another information, just to remind you, our friend from Gajah Mada University, if you still recognize him, Dr. Sri Margana also wrote about the history of Blambangan during 17th century. He also discussed about the presence of missionaries in the Eastern Java. Probably I will send his book to you after this.
yes.
Meeting, because I think
everybody wants to can write for me. I will give and send the materials and resources. We can talk later. Of course, you can use Professor Daya has a channel, if you permit me to put in contact. But the alliances of the Portuguese Indo-Buddhists, if we imagine where we have Hinduism or Buddhism in Indonesia nowadays, Bali and some small areas in Eastern Java, it was what rests from what was in the past, the domination of the Hinduism. Since the Vietnam, Champa, Ayutthaya in Thailand, in Cambodia, Angkor Wat, in Burma, and Malaysia, the Hinduism was spread all over the Southeast Asia. But the arrival and the incoming of the Islam was like a green wave, which was so attractable, so fashionable to the people that they came to be converted. And the Portuguese, they tried to use these formally final kingdoms. For example, Majapahit, it was in the last finals, but the Portuguese, they thought that they will resist and they will be permanent. No, we were wrong. And the alliances, they were not only they were more focused in politics and military power than even the trade relations. The trade, it was not the main focus, because the Portuguese, they only want the open areas to trade, to smuggle, to commercialize, but they prefer to create connections, political and military connections. Winda 3 has to tick.
So probably let's move
okay.
to the first question from Irfan. He also my student, and he asked about the trading competition between formal and informal, because he tried to read your PowerPoint last week. So he want to ask, and another thing he want to ask is, was there any Portuguese organization or company like East India Company or Dutch East India Company? I just know that
no, the Portuguese
in the early 17th century we have is Compagnia da India, right?
Yes. Well, we conquered Malacca. It was almost a clandestine attack, because the King of Portugal he didn't give any permission to attack Malacca. And Albuquerque attacked and wrote a letter. I siege and I conquered Malacca. Well, like something it's done, okay? And the king, well, it's done. We have to support this, but it was not planned by Lisbon. The informal Portuguese, it's one example. They attack Malacca without the formal empire knows anything about this. It's the VOC, the Dutch, they organize in a plan for some years the whole of the activities, the rents, the profits, the everything. It was planned, and they design, they create a scheme, Excel sheet to planify what they want to do. Contrarily, the Portuguese were not, they did this many times. So, and the Portuguese, they used to the archipelago for what? They used to trade rice and products, to resell, for example, or they try to boycott, to impeach the trade between the rice from Java to Malacca. They want to be the furnishers, the suppliers of rice to Malacca. And well, it was, they created damage to the economy of the Macar Jepara. If the Portuguese interrupt this trade, they were with losses, and they have to fight the Portuguese. The Portuguese, they interrupt the trade of gloves with Maluka, and the kingdoms, the sultanates, they began to fight the Portuguese, to opposite and to defeat this impeachment of the Portuguese. The Portuguese, they try to capture some slaves from Java. Even our great poet Camões, I don't know if you know this great or national poet, he was a slave from Java, for example. They were usual to have slaves from Javanese slaves in Portugal, and the people, the men in Asia, for example, not only from Java, from many areas. The slavery was a practice, a very common practice in the Portuguese formal and informal empire. And the Portuguese, they extracted the sandalwood, mainly the sandalwood from Timor, West and East Timor. And well, they were traders more than colonialists. The Portuguese, they, when we lost Malacca, we lost the archipelago. Well, we lost the archipelago in 1605 when the Dutch were established in Java. When before the Dutch expelled the Portuguese from Malacca, we begin to lose our presence. We have the 16th century, it was our Indonesian century, but without colonialization, without a formal colonialism, only an informal presence, and at the same time of the trade, at the same time of this exploitation, the Portuguese tried to make conversions, first with the Jesuits, after with the Franciscans, but the Portuguese tried to convert some areas, mainly in Sulawesi, Manado, Makassar, for example, in Timor, Flores, Solor. It was a very important Catholic spot until nowadays. From Malacca, the Dominicans from Malacca, the Dominicans, they used to conquer, spiritually conquer, differently than the Jesuits with the accommodation method. It's another aspect that we have to analyze well later. So, Professor Vijaya. But if you write me, I will be all my pleasure, my teacher pleasure to answer you and to change and to, well, create a connection to help you if with the permission of your teachers and professors, of course. But I hope in the future
Yes.
we have a strongest connections.
Yeah. Yeah. I will share
Okay.
your email if you don't mind to our student.
Yeah.
Probably
Please.
they have some question and dream to go to
Yeah.
Portugal to continue their study.
Yes.
If you don't mind to your
Yeah,
beautiful
they
city.
can write in Indonesian, for example. Uh, I will try to translate, or I ask to Mr. Vijaya to help me.
Yeah. Can we move to another question from Harry or Harry Mascareñas? He want to ask, did the Portuguese take a religious approach when they visited to get close for the Portuguese?
Yes. Uh, if the Portuguese take a religious approach to the people, yes, of course. The Portuguese, they were colonialists with two hands. In one hand, a sword, and another one, the cross. Always this, a cross and a sword. The Muslims, for example, they came to trade and they attract. In Indonesia, in my opinion, they didn't impose, for example, they are not missionaries. Well, they never made any effort to knock. Well, are you interested to know something about the life of Jesus Christ and blah, blah, blah? No, the Muslims, they had a way of life. They were merchants, traders, and they show their power, their strength coming from the trade, from the work. For example, the Hadramaut people, like your former president in East Timor, Mari Al-Khatiri, is descendant of Hadramaut from Yemen. They were people of work and work and work. People whose work 24 hours a day, and they give the example. This example was very attractive for the opportunity of the people in Indonesia, in Java, for example, full of the Hinduist system of castes. Imagine a Javanese was under the Hinduists rulers because they they descend from people from India. The people ruling, they were above the rice producer, above the Javanese, and what they feel, oh, we still to be under the people of the highest castes. No, the Islam offer us equality. We will be the same. I will pray in the most close the merchant, close the trader, close the poor, close. Well, this gives to them an attraction. The Christians, they came and they told this in many aspects. there's only salvation inside the church. If you are a Christian, you are saved. If you are not Christians, you will go to the hell. Well, many missionaries, they used to preach, they used to missionate with this system. The Jesuits, they come and they try to, oh, I will pray in Javanese, I will pray in Sundanese, I will pray, and I will try to create an adaptation. But the scope was the same, to convert to the Christianism. Yes, and the Portuguese traders, they used to, well, to give the way to the missionaries many times. Other times they impeach the missionaries. Why? Because the missionaries, they came to disturb the populations. The populations, they were Islamized, and they didn't want to make more conversions. They were established. Why these guys come to try to reconvert and convert? And in many areas, it was a fight between these missionaries, because the missionaries, many times they forgot that they are coming to civilizations highest I developed with a structured religion and without any needs of a new religion. For example, in the Philippines, they were animists, the majority of them. The majority of the Filipinos, they were without any religion. They were, well, more profitable to the missionaries and the Spanish method to impose to the spiritual courage. The Portuguese, they try, the Dominican friars in Solor, in Flores, mainly in Solor, they created, if you go, for example, to Flores, you know better than me, I suppose, you will find the Portuguese names, the confraternities of Nossa Senhora do Rosário. You can assist to the Eastern parades, you can assist to the masses, for example, with a different expression, religious expression. It's the descendancy of these Portuguese methods, but in the majority of the archipelago of Indonesia, they become Muslims, leaving the Hinduism. They, in many areas, they have the option to follow the leaders to convert, and they were more comfortable with Islam. Suddenly appeared a religion from people coming from the West, from the so far West. For many people, it was not very welcome. But yes, the Portuguese have always tried to work with a religious approach. It's very usual. Until the 19th century, it was clearly a strategy. And Henry the Navigator, when he wrote to the Pope to ask permission to go to Ceuta in Morocco, for example, he had to wrote this: we will fight with the Crusader spirit. Well, the Crusades, for the Christians, they don't represent anything bad, but we have to go to the other side. How the Muslims, they analyzed the Crusades. Well, it's not really very good, of course. And when a prince writes with a spirit of crusade, even without any anachronism, even today still to be very, permit me the expression, it's very dangerous. Ok, Mr. Ronaldinho, obrigado. Espero que ainda fale português. You can write in Portuguese. Mr. Daya, he knows Portuguese very well, for example. Thank you. And we have a new message. Selamat sore, good afternoon.
We have
it's-
limited time, so probably
Okay.
and we have the last two questions. Probably I will try to summarize their questions. So number one, he asked about the was drawback for the Islamic sultanates in Indonesia when the Portuguese cooperate with the Hindu Buddhist kingdom, just like in Sunda kingdom. Is it a drawback or payback for the Islamic Empire in Indonesia? And another question from Winda, she just want to know the Portuguese view of Indonesia in the age of commerce. Probably do you have like some enlightenment for her? So could you please summarize those two questions before we are closing this lecture, because it's going to 6 p.m. and it's time to pray Maghrib here.
Okay. The first question is from Naga Pramud, no?
Yeah, yes, Nanda.
Yes, the cooperation, it was not only based in the trade sector with the Indo-Buddhist, it's what I explained before. The cooperation, it was more political and even with some military approaches, but it was politically and the trade was in order to create some facilities and to create some well, opportunities to keep the trade connections. It was important because they want to guarantee a connection, a linkage between India and Indonesia. So the second question, it was from
Winda.
The
Portuguese view of Indonesia.
The Portuguese view of Indonesia nowadays. Well, it's a very complex question. I'm sorry, but I will get sick. No, the Portuguese vision of Indonesia nowadays, it's very good. It's I can swear that many people, educated and graduated people in Portugal, wishes to visit Indonesia, to make a trip to Indonesia, not only to Bali, but Borobudur. And so Indonesia becomes a spot, and many people, they at the same times, well, the other side, or many population in Portugal, they still have the idea of Timor, East Timor, what happened there. Well, but they almost forgot what really happened. And nowadays, the Portuguese, they don't have anything against Indonesia. I think it's completely past. Yes, I'm sincerely talking about this because our relations were contaminated by this problem, by this situation. Well, the Indonesians, the Portuguese knows that nowadays, even and mainly in Indonesia, you are reanalyzing, of course, this period of your history, that it was a part of a nationalism, or a period of your political history, that it was not what Indonesia wants to be identified. So the Indonesia for the Portuguese, it's an unknown history. The past, the many Portuguese actually they don't know really what is Indonesia. If I will talk in the universities, even in the universities, from many people, Indonesia is a whole of thousands of islands. It's the greatest Muslim country all over the world, but nothing so more than this. Many times I'm like an ambassador of your country, because I explain Indonesia will be the fifth economy all over the world. Indonesia is making a new capital in Borneo. Indonesia, it's a very important producer of blah blah blah. Indonesia, it's a beautiful spot to visit, but for many people, Indonesia still to be a thousands of island country with lots of volcans and lots of warm and rainforests and humidity. Well, even the people, for example, the issue of East Timor, it's completely, as I told you before, completely solved. But, in a historical approach, for some universitarians and some academic people, Indonesia, it's still to be a little bit unknown. They know what is Indonesia. It's a concept, but the containing of this concept, what kind of concept is Indonesia? It's not, for many people, it's a touristic spot. Day by day, they want to go and they see the rooftops of Malang, the colored rooftops, for example. One of these days, I show it to my students. Wow, what kind of beautiful, with the smoke of Merapi and the volcans, and so wow. Well, and the question why the population it's not spread in the southern shore of Java, the ghost, the female ghost, and I'm telling the stories and so. But the Indonesia, it was really important for Portugal in the past. I'm sorry, I'm trying to. The sunshine, it's okay for you, no? It's like apocalypse now. I'm sorry, the guy. Okay, but we have to. My efforts nowadays I'm trying to explain better and to show and to create a kind of show off to what is Indonesia. Your embassy, they have lots of work to do to increase, to try to show that we are talking about one of the most important international economies, for example. We are talking about one of the most important pivotal strategical spots all over the world. It's not between Asia and Australia, but well, with a rich history, very important. The Portuguese, well, we were not able and capable to sustain and to maintain our presence in Indonesia, but we have more presence than what we know. As I talked last session and one of these days with in another online speech, the Portuguese descendancy in Indonesia, it's stronger than what we really know nowadays. And we have lots of studies to persist and to do concerning genetics, concerning anthropology, concerning music, folklore, ethnology, ethnography, for example, from Axé to, well, I spoke about Mardaikers, I spoke about, we have a Tugu, not only in Jakarta, but we have a Tugu in Semarang also, for example, completely unknown. One of these days I read about the Portuguese traders that they still to work in the under the rule of the Dutch. You know that the first Portuguese Bible translation to Portuguese was did in Java. The Christian Bible, the first translation to Portuguese language, it was not did here in Portugal. It was in 1640 something. When some years later, the arrival of the DOC in Batavia for João Ferreira de Almeida, Calvinist Portuguese, who translated to Portuguese and still to be used by many Protestant Portuguese speaking communities. It's very interesting. It's one of the most important topics for many Portuguese because religion is very interesting topic for many people, and even they don't know what really it's the Calvinism and the Bible was for Protestants. We have these different approaches, and so. But well, we are here to develop the image of Indonesia and to really discover our 500 historical relations. It's the oldest Western historical relation you have. Indonesia is with the Portuguese. The Portuguese, we are the oldest partners of Indonesia in the connections with the East and West and West and East. Terima kasih.
So thank you so much, Vitor Teixeira, for lecturing us today. So we have a lot of questions. And
yes,
probably
we have to make periodical meetings.
Yeah, and probably I will share your email to my student. Probably they will
please
directly to you. And for your information to our student, that Professor Vitor Teixeira will come to Java in July. He will be one of keynote speakers in our conference, faculty conference. So you can join the conference and ask directly to Professor Vitor in July here in Malang. So Professor Vitor, thank you so much for your lecture. Hope you enjoy your day today. And
thank you.
We will meet again.
Yes, keep in touch. Keep in touch.
Thank you. So
you're welcome.
Let's end our session today. My student will play the department profile and we will close our meeting. Thank you so much. Selamat sore.
Thank you. Selamat
bom
sore.
dia. Bom dia.
Bom dia, bom dia, bom dia. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.